I still remember the first night of that week, as if the cold had carved it into my bones. Snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets outside my father's old house on the edge of Aspen. I stood on the porch, my boots buried in white, holding a letter that felt heavier than any storm. The world was quiet except for the wind pushing snowflakes into my hair, and in that silence I felt the weight of my life tilting in a direction I never wanted. My father had been gone for barely 3 weeks. His heart had given out in the early morning, in the same bedroom he had slept in since I was a child. I thought grief would be the only burden I carried this winter. I was wrong. When I opened the letter from the bank that afternoon, my stomach turned to ice. My father had taken a mortgage I knew nothing about, and the house I loved, the only piece of my family left, was now days away from foreclosure. The sum was staggering, something a public school music teacher like me could never pay in time. I called the number listed on the notice, hoping for a miracle. Instead, I heard a name I hadn't spoken aloud in nearly a decade. Cole Holdings, the receptionist said. This debt is now owned by Mr. Ethan Cole's private firm. The sound of his name hit me like a ghost stepping out of the past. Ethan. The boy who used to race me down the frozen river on skates. The boy who once swore he'd never leave me behind. And the man who disappeared without a backward glance 9 years ago, leaving only a short email that said, "I can't stay." I was still trying to calm the shaking in my hands when the call was transferred to a law office. A man with a clipped, careful voice introduced himself as Mr. Townsend, attorney for Ethan Cole. His words were polite, but sharp enough to cut. "Miss Parker," he said, "Mr. Cole is aware of the situation with your property. He is willing to offer a private arrangement to settle the debt before the bank proceeds." I pressed the phone to my ear so hard it hurt. What kind of arrangement? There was a pause. Papers shuffled on his end of the line. "You are to spend 7 consecutive nights at Mr. Cole's mountain lodge, in one shared suite. At the conclusion of that week, the debt will be cleared, and the deed to your home will be fully yours again." For a moment, I thought I misheard him. I stepped off the porch into the snow, heart pounding, and stared at the frozen forest as if the trees could confirm what he'd said. "You're joking," I whispered. "I assure you this is an entirely legal and private agreement. I will email the terms to you for review. If you do not agree, foreclosure will proceed as scheduled next week." I could barely breathe. I thought of my father's house, its worn cedar beams, the piano in the living room where I had learned my first scales, the kitchen that still smelled faintly of his coffee. Losing it would be like losing him all over again. But Ethan, I hadn't seen him since he chose Wall Street over us, since he traded the quiet of this town for glass towers and magazine covers. He was no longer the boy with a guitar and snowflakes in his hair. He was a man who owned ski resorts, private jets, and, apparently, the roof over my head. I felt anger twist under my ribs, a flash of humiliation followed by something darker, the knowledge that I had no choice. By nightfall, the contract sat in my inbox. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the clauses. 7 nights, 1 suite, cameras only in the common areas for verification, debt cleared upon completion. I signed. Somewhere deep in the mountains, Ethan Cole was waiting, and I was walking straight into the storm he had become. I sat in my old Subaru at the edge of town, the signed contract folded in the passenger seat like a weight pressing against my chest. Streetlights glowed pale through the snow, and every car that passed made me wonder if I was out of my mind. Humiliation burned in me like frostbite. I had spent the night staring at my ceiling, imagining every possible way to escape this situation. Could I sell the car? Borrow from friends? Move into a cramped apartment and let the bank take the house? But every solution ended the same. My father's home gone, his memory boxed up and carried away by strangers. I thought of the smell of his coffee in the mornings, the worn grooves in the wooden railing he carved himself, and I knew I couldn't lose it. So here I was, driving toward a man I had promised myself I would never see again. The road twisted into the mountains, flanked by evergreens bent under the weight of snow. My tires crunched on ice, and my wipers fought to keep the windshield clear. With every mile, the town disappeared behind me, and the wilderness swallowed the world whole. I imagined Ethan waiting at the lodge, probably in some perfectly tailored sweater, leaning against the stone fireplace like the king of a kingdom I didn't belong to. I wondered if he would smirk when I walked in, if he would see the defeat in my eyes. Part of me wanted to turn the car around, but the contract in my passenger seat kept me moving. It felt like I was driving toward a sentence I couldn't appeal. After nearly an hour, the road narrowed and began to climb. Snow swirled like smoke around the headlights, and the sky had the heavy gray of a storm that wasn't finished with me yet. Finally, a gate appeared, a dark metal arch with a small sign. Cole Summit Lodge. Private property. I pressed the button on the intercom. My voice shook as I said my name. The gate opened with a slow groan, and I drove through, my stomach tightening with every curve. The trees fell away, and suddenly there it was, Ethan's lodge, rising out of the snow like a fortress. 3 stories of stone and timber, its windows glowing gold against the icy white world. Smoke curled from the chimney, and for a brief second, it felt less like a house and more like a test I might fail. I parked near the steps, gripping the steering wheel long after the engine stopped. My hands were clammy despite the cold. "This is it," I whispered to no one. I stepped out into the snow, boots crunching on the stone walkway. The wind bit my cheeks, and flakes clung to my hair. With every step toward the massive wooden door, I could feel the life I knew slipping further behind me. The door opened before I could knock. A man in his late 50s, wearing a gray vest and friendly eyes, greeted me. "Miss Parker? Mr. Cole is expecting you. Come in before you freeze." Warmth hit me as I stepped inside. The scent of cedar and pine smoke wrapped around me, and the crackle of the fireplace echoed through the vaulted living room. Antler chandeliers hung overhead, and the entire space felt too big, too polished, like it belonged to someone carved from a different world. And there he was. Ethan stood at the far end of the room, one hand resting casually on the stone mantel. He had changed, of course. His boyish face had sharpened into something controlled, confident. His hair was darker than I remembered, his posture straight, his eyes unreadable. "Lily," he said, his voice low and even, as if 9 years hadn't passed at all. I gripped the strap of my bag and forced myself to meet his gaze. 7 nights, I said, because it was the only thing I could manage. Something flickered in his eyes, triumph, regret, or maybe nothing at all. 7 nights, he agreed, and in that moment, I knew the week ahead would change more than just the deed to my house. The door to the suite closed with a soft click behind me, and for a moment I just stood there, staring. The room was beautiful, almost like a spread from a luxury magazine. Exposed timber beams crossed the vaulted ceiling, and a massive window overlooked the snow-covered valley below. A stone fireplace flickered in the corner, and a king-sized bed sat in the middle of the room, its white duvet as smooth as untouched snow. Yet somehow, despite the warmth and the fire, the lodge felt cold. Not in temperature, but in the way silence pressed against the walls. Ethan stepped in behind me, his footsteps quiet on the polished wood. He didn't look at me right away. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who owned the air he breathed, the kind of man I didn't recognize anymore. "Your bag can go there," he said finally, nodding toward a bench at the foot of the bed. His voice was calm, clipped, businesslike. I set my suitcase down and tried to keep my hands steady. Every movement felt watched, measured, though he didn't seem to be paying me any real attention. A heavy silence stretched between us. I glanced at the bed and felt my stomach twist. "It's one bed." He didn't even blink. "The agreement specified a shared suite." I nodded, my throat tight. "Right." The caretaker, the kind man who had greeted me at the Somme d'Hour, had already disappeared down the hall. It was just us now, standing in a room that felt too small for all the things we weren't saying. I busied myself by unpacking a sweater, pretending I didn't feel the heat of his presence behind me. In the reflection of the window, I caught him loosening his watch strap, his face unreadable. That was when the memories hit me. It was impossible to stand in a place like this, firelight dancing on wood, snow falling outside, and not think of the last summer before everything broke. I was 18, he was 19, and we had spent nearly every day by the small lake near my father's property. Ethan had an old guitar with a cracked neck, and I used to bring my battered keyboard out to the dock. Together, we tried to write a song we never finished. It was clumsy and simple, a little ballad about summer nights and northern stars, but it felt like ours. I could still see him sitting cross-legged on the dock, the water reflecting fireflies, his voice teasing as he strummed the same 4 chords over and over. "Your turn, Lil," he'd say. "The chorus needs you." I never knew if he meant my voice or my heart. Maybe both. Now, in this silent room, that memory stung. The boy who once asked me to sing for him was gone. In his place was the man who had left without looking back, now watching me like I was part of a transaction. The fire crackled. My hands fidgeted with the edge of my sweater. Ethan finally broke the silence. "I'll take the right side. That's fine with you?" I forced my voice to sound steady. "Left side's always been mine." His eyes flicked toward me, a tiny recognition sparking there, as if he remembered that detail too. He said nothing, only crossed to the fireplace and tossed another log into the flames. I climbed into my side of the bed fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, every nerve on edge. The room smelled like pine and faint smoke, the same scent that once meant safety. Now it only reminded me that the longest week of my life had just begun. The fire had burned low, leaving the room in a soft amber glow. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, carrying the sound of snow sliding off the roof. I drifted into a restless sleep, curled on my side, fully clothed beneath the heavy duvet. It must have been after midnight when I stirred. A weight pressed lightly against my waist, warm and steady. At first, in the haze of half-sleep, I thought I was dreaming of summers past, of nights by the lake, when life had been simple. Then I realized it wasn't a dream. Ethan's arm was draped across me, his hand resting against the edge of my hip as if it had been there for years. His breath was slow and even, brushing the back of my neck. My heart stumbled in my chest. I froze, my eyes open in the dim light, the shadows of the lodge stretching across the ceiling. For a long moment I didn't move. I didn't dare. And then, so soft I almost thought I imagined it, I heard him murmur my old nickname, Lil. The sound of it cracked something deep inside me. No one had called me that in nearly a decade. Not my colleagues, not my friends, not even my father. That name belonged to another life, one that ended the day Ethan packed his bags for the city and left me standing on the lake shore. I felt heat rise behind my eyes. I hated that a single word could do this to me. Hated that my body remembered him even when my mind swore I'd moved on. Carefully, I tried to shift away, to slide out from under his arm without waking him. His grip tightened instinctively, and for a second I stopped breathing. Was this instinct, muscle memory, or something else? My thoughts spiraled. Did he really forget me all these years, or had I haunted him the way he haunted me? Had he ever thought about the song we never finished? The nights we spent counting satellites and pretending they were shooting stars? I stared at the window, watching the snow drift past like ghosts, and let my mind slip backward. I remembered the last night before he left. We had been lying on the dock, staring up at a sky so wide it felt endless. He was quiet, more than usual, and I'd asked him what he was thinking. "Nothing," he had said, but his hand had tightened around mine. I didn't know then that he had already decided to go, that he had chosen ambition over us, leaving me with a half-written melody and a heart full of questions. Now, here in this lodge, the years between us felt paper-thin. I could almost believe we were the same kids on that dock, if not for the silence and the contract binding me to this bed. I swallowed hard and whispered into the dark, so soft it was meant for me alone. Have you really forgotten me, Ethan? Or have you been pretending like I have? The only answer was his breathing, steady and deep, and the soft hiss of the wind outside. I stayed like that for a while, trapped between the ache of memory and the sharp edge of the present. Part of me wanted to pull away, to put that wall back between us. Another part, the foolish part I had buried for 9 years, wanted to stay still and pretend for just a moment that nothing had ever gone wrong. Eventually, I eased his arm off my waist and slid toward the edge of the bed. My feet touched the cold floor, grounding me in reality. I walked to the window and pressed my palm against the glass, letting the chill sink into my skin. The valley below was drowned in snow, the pines bowed under the weight of winter. We were alone up here, cut off from the world, and I felt it in my bones. This week would not leave me the same. Behind me, Ethan shifted but didn't wake. His hand reached into empty air where I had been, and then fell to the mattress. I climbed back into my side of the bed, facing away from him, my mind a storm of questions I wasn't ready to ask out loud. Somewhere in that swirl of thoughts, exhaustion claimed me again. And as I drifted off, one truth pressed into my chest like the weight of the snow outside. No matter how much I tried to bury it, a single whispered "Lil" was enough to remind me that some parts of the heart never forget. The next morning, I woke to the sound of wind hammering the walls like a restless fist. The fire had gone out, and the pale winter light through the tall windows made the lodge feel like a snow globe, silent, sealed, and separate from the world. I checked my phone. No signal. Ethan was already up, dressed in a dark sweater and jeans, sitting at the dining table with his laptop. A satellite phone lay beside him, blinking a faint green light. "Storm's worse than expected," he said without looking up. "Roads are closed. We're stuck until the plows come through." The words settled heavy in my stomach. I had known, logically, that we were isolated here, but hearing it out loud was different. It made the walls feel closer. I spent the morning wandering the house, half trying to keep busy and half trying not to think about how strange this was. The lodge was enormous, 3 floors of stone and wood, with hallways that smelled like pine and leather. There were guest rooms, reading nooks, even a game room with a pool table no one had touched in years. But the more I explored, the more trapped I felt. By late afternoon, the sky darkened, and the snow outside turned to a swirling white curtain. Then the power flickered once, twice, and died completely. The sudden silence was jarring. No hum of heaters, no low buzz of lights. Just the wind and the creak of timber. I grabbed a flashlight from a cabinet, my footsteps echoing against the wood floors. The air had a bite to it now, the kind that crawled under your sweater and stayed there. I told myself I was just walking to stay warm, but really, I was restless. My mind kept circling the same thoughts. The contract, the debt, Ethan's arm around me in the night, the soft whisper of a name I thought I'd buried. That was when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the storm or the house. A note, soft and resonant, drifting through the darkened hall. Music. I froze, then followed it, letting the sound guide me down the main staircase and toward a wide set of double doors I hadn't opened yet. Inside, a fire crackled faintly, and in the center of the room stood a grand piano, black and gleaming even in the dim light. Ethan sat at the bench, his fingers moving with slow, deliberate care. And he was playing our song, the unfinished melody we wrote when we were just kids, the one that started as a joke on the lake dock and became the soundtrack of that last summer. I leaned against the door frame, my breath caught somewhere in my chest. The notes wavered, like he was reaching for something he couldn't quite hold. But the heart of it was there, raw, and unmistakable. He didn't see me at first. His shoulders were hunched slightly, his head tilted down, and for a fleeting moment, he looked like the boy I remembered. Messy-haired, lost in music, unaware the world could take anything from him. When the song faltered, I whispered before I could stop myself. "You still remember that?" He turned, and for the first time since I arrived, his face softened. Not the cold mask he wore for business, not the unreadable stare across the bed. "Some things," he said quietly, "don't go away, no matter how far you run." The words hit me like the chill outside, sharp and undeniable. I took a step into the room, my flashlight beam catching the edges of the piano. The storm howled beyond the walls, but inside the lodge, the world had narrowed to a memory made of keys and firelight. For the first time in 9 years, I let myself listen. I stepped fully into the room, my boots making the faintest sound against the rug. The fire in the stone hearth popped, sending a tiny shower of sparks up the chimney. Ethan's fingers slowed on the keys, the last note of our old melody lingering in the air like a breath we both held. "I didn't think you'd ever play that again," I said softly, feeling the heat from the fire touch my chilled skin. He turned on the bench, his face half lit by the flames. There was something unguarded in his expression, as if the music had peeled back a layer of armor he usually carried. "I never stopped playing it," he said, voice low but steady. "I just stopped letting anyone hear." The admission knocked the air out of me for a moment. I crossed the room slowly, drawn toward the piano like it had gravity. My fingers hovered above the glossy black surface before I let them rest on the cool edge. "You remember all of it?" I asked, eyes on the keys. "Every note," he said, and I felt the weight of what he wasn't saying. Every summer evening, every promise, every goodbye. I thought I'd built a fortress around my heart in the years since he left. Brick by brick, silence by silence. But standing there, hearing the song we wrote as teenagers, I could feel the walls start to tremble. "I used to hate this song," I admitted, my throat tight. Not because it was bad, because it reminded me of the last summer before everything fell apart. Ethan's hands rested in his lap, his knuckles pale in the firelight. "I hated it too," he said. "Every time I played it in the city, it felt like the piano was asking me why I left." I swallowed hard, unsure if I was ready to hear more, but I didn't stop him. "I told myself leaving was the smart thing to do," he continued, voice quieter now. "College, internships, the company. I thought I could bury this place, bury us. But every time I touched a piano, there you were. Every time winter came, I remembered the lake." The words settled over me heavier than the snow outside. I didn't know whether to feel angry or relieved. For a long moment, we just sat in the firelit room, the storm, whispering against the windows. Then, almost without thinking, I reached out and pressed a single key. The note rang clear and familiar. Ethan's gaze flicked to my hand, then back to my face. "Play it with me," he said, a quiet plea under the calm tone. I hesitated, then lowered myself onto the bench beside him. The heat of his shoulder brushed mine, and I tried to ignore the way my chest tightened. My fingers found the simple chord progression we wrote as kids, and his joined in seamlessly, filling the gaps I'd forgotten. For a few minutes there was no contract, no debt, no 9 years of silence. There was just the music, warm and alive between us. When the song trailed off, I let my hands fall into my lap. My heart was pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "You never forgot," I whispered, not entirely a question. He shook his head slowly. "Not the song. Not you." The fire popped again, and for the first time since I arrived, the lodge didn't feel so cold. A small crack had formed in the wall I'd built around myself, and the warmth of old memories began to slip through. I stood after a moment, needing the space to breathe. "I should check the candles upstairs," I said, retreating toward the doorway. Ethan didn't stop me, but his eyes followed me until I disappeared into the hall. As I climbed the stairs, I realized something that scared me more than the storm, more than the contract. No matter how hard I'd tried to forget him, part of me had been waiting to hear that song again. By the third day, the storm had settled into a rhythm, and so had the silence between us. We moved through the lodge like two ghosts sharing the same space, orbiting each other without touching. That morning, I woke to an unusual sound, an uneven drip, followed by a splash. At first, I thought it was the wind shaking snow from the roof. Then my socks hit the floor, and I felt it. Cold, wet, and rising. "Ethan!" My voice echoed down the hall, sharp with alarm. He appeared from the kitchen in an instant, barefoot, his hair mussed in a way I had never seen before. "What happened?" I pointed toward the small stream snaking across the polished wood floor. "I think we have a problem." He followed the trail to the laundry room, and his muttered curse confirmed it. A pipe burst, probably the old line from the north wall. I knew I should have had this replaced last fall. Water was already pooling near the doorway. I grabbed the first towels I could find and started building a dam. He joined me, moving fast, no trace of the composed, untouchable businessman he usually was. For the next 20 minutes, we became an unplanned team. He ran to the basement to shut off the main valve, while I scooped water with a dustpan into a bucket like some desperate pioneer. My hair stuck to my cheeks, my socks were soaked, and my fingers burned from the cold. When he returned, his sweats were wet to the knees. He looked nothing like the man who had once left me for city lights. And for some reason, seeing him like that, vulnerable, human, broke something loose in me. I slipped on the wet floor and landed on my knees with a splash. The sound was so ridiculous that I started to laugh. A real, full laugh I hadn't felt in years. Ethan blinked at me, startled. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I managed between giggles. "Just look at us. We're a disaster." He stared for a moment, then, to my surprise, he laughed too. It was quieter, rougher than I remembered, but it was real. We mopped, wiped, and wrung towels in near hysterics, every clumsy movement making the task seem both urgent and absurd. My hair dripped into my face, and he handed me a dry rag like it was some grand offering. "You've got, He gestured vaguely to my head. I swiped at my bangs and only made them worse. He chuckled again, and I rolled my eyes. "Go ahead. Laugh at my misery." "I'm laughing at ours," he said, wringing out another towel. "Teamwork, right?" The word settled strangely in my chest. For so long he had felt like the enemy, the stranger holding my future hostage. But here we were, kneeling on the floor, dripping water and memories, fighting the same small disaster. By the time the leak was under control, the floor gleamed with damp streaks, and my muscles ached from crouching. I collapsed onto the rug near the fire, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. Ethan sat across from me, his hair still wet, his sweatshirt clinging to his shoulders. For a fleeting second he looked young again, like the boy who used to steal my marshmallows by the fire pit and smile like he'd never leave. The lodge, for all its size, felt smaller in that moment, warmer, not just from the fire, but from the fragile, unexpected laughter still echoing between the walls. By the time we had wrung out the last towel and pushed the bucket of water to the porch, my body ached in places I didn't even know could ache. My socks were dripping, my sweater clung to me, and my fingers were raw from the cold. But for the first time since I'd arrived, I felt lighter. Ethan sank onto the rug in front of the fireplace, leaning back on his hands, hair damp and sticking up like he'd just rolled out of a river. I dropped down across from him, pulling a thick blanket over my shoulders. Steam rose faintly from our clothes as the fire worked to dry us out. "You've got mud on your face," he said, tilting his head toward me with the faintest smile. I rubbed my cheek with the back of my hand, smearing it worse. He laughed quietly, and I felt my own mouth curve in response. That laugh, it startled me. Not because it was loud, but because it was familiar. It was the same laugh I'd once heard echoing over the lake, chasing fireflies and skipping rocks in the dusk. "Remember that summer?" I asked before I could stop myself. He didn't pretend, not to know which one. His eyes softened. "The year we swore we'd swim across the whole lake and back in one day?" "And failed miserably," I said, chuckling at the memory. "I got a cramp halfway across and thought I was dying." "You weren't dying," he said, voice low. "But I carried you back anyway." I let the memory play out in my mind. The glint of sun on the water, the cool weight of his arm around me, the sound of our splashing mixed with our breathless laughter. It was so vivid, as if the years between then and now had folded in on themselves. We fell quiet for a while, the fire popping softly. I stared into the flames, and in them I saw flickers of another night. The night we tried to camp on the lakeshore in that old green tent. It had rained, and we'd ended up in the back of his pickup truck, shivering under one shared blanket, laughing so hard our stomachs hurt. Back then, life was so small and so endless at the same time. My world was him, the lake, and the sound of summer crickets. I don't know how long I stayed wrapped in those memories before the present crept back in, heavier than the wet sweater clinging to me. I was sitting here now, in a stranger's lodge, with a man who was both the boy I once loved and someone I no longer recognized. The warmth in the room began to seep under my skin, and with it came something dangerous. My heart, the one I had guarded for nearly a decade, was stirring. It was subtle at first. A flutter in my chest when he brushed a wet strand of hair off his forehead. A ripple of warmth when his smile reached his eyes. I hated it. I feared it. I pulled the blanket tighter around me and looked away, pretending to focus on the fire. I couldn't let myself fall into the easy rhythm of nostalgia, not when the reality was that we were here because of a contract, not because he had come back for me. Yet the sound of our laughter lingered in the air, and I couldn't deny that it felt like the first real breath I'd taken since my father's funeral. The room was quiet now, except for the crackle of wood and the distant moan of the wind against the windows. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the warmth soak in, and a dangerous thought whispered at the edge of my mind. What if this week isn't just a punishment? I shook the thought away, standing to hang our wet clothes by the fire. My reflection in the window caught me off guard, cheeks flushed, hair wild, and a small, reluctant smile curving my lips. I turned from the glass and back to the flames, forcing my voice steady. "I'll make tea," I said, more to myself than to him. Anything to give my hands something to do, anything to keep my heart from forgetting why I was here. But deep down, as I moved toward the kitchen, I already knew the truth. The walls I'd built around my heart were beginning to crack. And once a crack forms, it never truly disappears. By the sixth night, the mountain had turned, restless again. Snow slammed against the windows, and the wind howled through the trees with a voice that sounded almost human. The storm had returned fiercer than before, rattling the shutters and plunging the lodge into a dim, flickering glow. Around 8 o'clock, the lights went out completely. The hum of the heater faded, and the silence of the blackout was broken only by the moan of the wind. I found Ethan in the great room, crouched by the fireplace as he coaxed a reluctant flame to life. Shadows flickered across his face, sharpening the angles, softening the hardness I'd grown used to. "Looks like it's just us and the fire tonight," he said, glancing over his shoulder. I lowered myself onto the rug, pulling a blanket around my shoulders. "I guess the mountain wants us to talk." He huffed a soft laugh, then sat beside me. For a moment, we listened to the crackle of burning wood and the storm pressing against the glass. I don't know what made him speak first. Maybe it was the storm, or the darkness, or the way silence in a place like this feels heavier than words. "My father used to love nights like this," he said, his voice quiet, almost swallowed by the fire. He said storms made the world honest, no distractions, no noise. Just you, the dark, and whatever you're trying to hide. I turned my head toward him. He was staring into the fire, eyes reflecting orange and gold. When he and my mom died, I couldn't come back here, he continued. This lodge, the lake, even the town. It was all them. Every tree, every shadow. I thought leaving would make it easier to breathe. I didn't interrupt. I went to the city and told myself that if I worked hard enough, if I built something big enough, it would fill the space they left behind. He rubbed a hand over his face. It didn't. I made my first million before I turned 25. Bought my first building before I was 30. And I'd go home to a penthouse so quiet it felt like a museum. The fire popped, sending a tiny shower of sparks up the chimney. He didn't look at me when he said the next words. I thought about calling you so many times, especially that first year. My chest tightened. But I told myself you'd moved on, that you deserved someone who wasn't broken the way I was. He paused, shaking his head. So I buried myself in work and told myself it was enough. It never was. Outside, the storm howled like it was echoing his confession. I stared into the fire, letting the weight of his words settle over me. I thought about the boy I'd loved, the one who held my hand on the dock and promised we'd write a song about every summer. I thought about the man beside me now, who had everything he could buy and nothing that mattered. For the first time, I saw the emptiness behind his walls. Not the arrogance, not the wealth, but the hollow space that success couldn't fill. I'm sorry, he said finally, voice rough. For leaving, for not coming back sooner, for everything. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening on the edge of the blanket. I wanted to speak, to say something sharp, or soft, or anything at all. But the words tangled in my chest. Instead, I leaned back against the sofa, letting the warmth of the fire soak into me. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, for the first time in years, I saw Ethan, not as the man who left, but as the boy who once needed me, and maybe still did. The fire had burned low, leaving the room bathed in a soft orange glow. Shadows from the flames stretched long across the timbered walls, and the sound of the storm outside became a distant hum, like the world was holding its breath for us. Ethan sat across from me, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as if he could see all the years we had lost laid out there between us. I keep thinking about how easy it would have been, he said quietly, to just stay. Back then, I had everything I wanted in 1 square mile. Your laugh, the lake, this lodge, and I threw it away because I was scared of being small. The words caught in my chest. You weren't small, I said after a long pause. You were just young. He looked up at me then, and the weight of his gaze made it hard to breathe. I hurt you. I nodded because denying it would have been pointless. You did. His hand ran through his hair, damp from the snow he'd brushed off earlier. I've thought about that moment I left 1,000 times, and every version of my life after that felt incomplete, like I built a world on top of a hollow space. Silence settled between us again, thick and fragile. I could hear the fire crack and the wind tap against the glass like fingertips. I wasn't sure who moved first, or maybe we both leaned forward at the same time, drawn by something older than anger and newer than forgiveness. Our faces hovered close, his breath mingling with mine, warm against the cold edge of the night. Lily, he said, my name soft but sure. And then he kissed me. It wasn't the impulsive kiss of teenagers, all heat and no thought. It was slow, deliberate, a question asked and answered in the same heartbeat. My hands, trembling, found his shoulders, and he pulled me closer, the blanket slipping from my shoulders to the floor. The fire popped, and the faint glow of a single candle we'd lit in the blackout cast us in its circle, like the rest of the lodge had vanished. For the first time since I arrived, I didn't feel trapped. I felt chosen, even if it terrified me. When we finally pulled apart, my heart was pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. He rested his forehead against mine, eyes closed, and whispered, "I don't want this week to end." I didn't know what to say, so I let the truth slip out. Me neither. We stayed there for a while, wrapped in the warmth of the fire and each other. The snow, outside, the contract, the years of silence. None of it mattered in that circle of candlelight. Later, when we finally moved to the bed, we didn't bother with the invisible line we'd kept between us for the first few nights. We lay facing each other, our hands tangled, saying nothing. Words felt too small for what was unfolding. I watched the candle flicker, shadows dancing across his face, softening the edges I'd convinced myself were made of stone. Somewhere in the quiet, a thought bloomed, heavy and certain. This isn't the man I hated for leaving. This is the boy I once loved, and maybe still do. As I drifted towards sleep in his arms, a sentence formed in my mind, one that would echo in my memory for years. That night was when the second story of us truly began. When the seventh night ended, the mountain felt like it was exhaling. The storm had passed, the sun rose over the snow-blanketed trees, and the world outside the lodge seemed almost innocent, as if it hadn't watched me fall back into the arms of the boy I once loved. I packed my small bag in quiet. Part of me didn't want to leave that cocoon of firelight and candle shadows. But life was waiting in the valley below. My father's house, the bookstore job I'd taken after college, the rhythm of small-town life that had always been my anchor. Ethan carried my bag to the car, his breath a cloud in the morning air. "I'll follow you down in a few days," he said. "I want to check the pipes and the roof while I'm here." I nodded, pretending that sounded casual, though the thought of him lingering in that lodge, our lodge, in a way, sent a quiet warmth through me. The drive back into town was like surfacing from a dream. I passed the frozen lake, the corner diner with its flickering neon sign, and the old post office where everyone still picked up their mail by hand. My life was here, steady and familiar, but I wasn't the same. At home, I tried to fold myself back into the routine. Mornings with coffee on the porch, afternoons shelving books at the store, evenings with the radio humming in my father's empty kitchen, but everything had a new layer to it, like someone had pulled a curtain back and let color in. Ethan kept his word. By midweek, he was in town, sleeves rolled up, crawling under my father's house with a toolbox and a grin that made me shake my head. "I thought millionaires didn't get their hands dirty," I teased as he emerged, smudged with dust. "Guess I'm a different kind of millionaire," he said, brushing off his jeans. "Or maybe I just like having an excuse to be here." We slipped into a rhythm that was startlingly normal. He fixed the leak in the bathroom, replaced 2 cracked window panes, and helped me haul a stubborn old sofa to the curb. I cooked simple dinners, stews, pasta, grilled cheese, and we ate at the little kitchen table that had seen every chapter of my life. In the evenings, we'd walk to the lake, boots crunching on the frozen path, our breath rising in the sharp air. He told me about his life in the city, the endless meetings, the penthouse that felt like a hotel room he never checked out of, the way he would sometimes play our old song on a muted piano just to feel less alone. I told him about the bookstore, about the kids who came in for story hour, and the older neighbors who treated it as a community hub. My life sounded small next to his, but he listened like every word mattered. For the first time in years, our love wasn't grand or dramatic. It was quiet, folded into the corners of ordinary days. He'd stop by the shop with coffee, or leave a sticky note on my counter that said things like, "Lake tonight," or "Don't forget to eat lunch." And every so often, I'd catch myself smiling for no reason, like my body knew something my mind was still cautious about. It felt fragile, this new chapter, as if a loud noise could shatter it. But it was real. One evening, I locked up the bookstore and saw him leaning against his truck across the street, waving. The golden light of sunset hit the snow around him, and for a moment, he looked exactly like the boy who once waited for me on that lake shore, the one I thought I'd lost forever. And I thought, Maybe, just maybe, this time we could get it right. It started as a quiet suspicion, a whisper at the back of my mind that I tried to ignore. At first, I blamed stress. My body had been through so much these last few weeks: grief, storms, and the whiplash of letting an old love back into my life. But as the days passed, the calendar on my phone became an unavoidable truth. I was late. I told myself it was only a few days, that it meant nothing. But one morning, standing in the kitchen with my coffee growing cold in my hands, a wave of unease hit me so hard I had to set the cup down. My heart thudded in my chest, and the small voice inside me whispered what I didn't want to admit. I went to the small pharmacy on Main Street, pulling my coat tight against the wind. The bell over the door chimed, and the pharmacist, Mrs. Green, who had known me since I was a child, greeted me with a smile. "Morning, Lily." "Morning," I managed, praying my face didn't betray the storm in my chest. I wandered the aisles slowly, pretending to browse cold medicine before sliding the small pink and white box into my basket. At home, I carried the bag to the bathroom like it was something fragile and dangerous. My hands shook as I read the instructions, though I knew them by heart. I had seen enough movies, enough whispered conversations among friends, to know what would come next. I took a deep breath, then another, and finally did what I had come to do. The wait felt eternal. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, staring at the floor tiles, my heart pounding in my ears. The quiet of the house was deafening. Outside, a few birds chirped against the winter sky, oblivious to the way my entire life was holding its breath. When I finally looked down, my throat closed. 2 pink lines. They were faint, but unmistakable, as if the universe had signed my name across that tiny piece of plastic. My hands trembled. I sank back against the cold tile wall, the box crumpled beside me. 1,000 emotions surged all at once: fear, wonder, disbelief, and something that felt dangerously close to hope. I thought about my father, about the home I had fought to keep, about the life I had tried to rebuild from pieces. I thought about Ethan, the boy who became a man who became a stranger, and then, somehow, became mine again. And now, there was this. I placed a hand on my stomach, still flat beneath my sweater, and whispered to the empty room, "It's just us right now." A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. I didn't even know if it was fear or joy or both tangled together. My life had been a series of plans I never finished, songs I never completed. And now, life had written something for me that I hadn't dared imagine. I sat there for a long time, listening to the faint ticking of the hallway clock and the occasional groan of the house settling. The weight of the moment pressed into me, sharp and tender all at once. Finally, I wiped my face, took a deep breath, and stood. In the mirror, my reflection looked different. Eyes wide, cheeks pale, a woman standing at the edge of the rest of her life. The test lay on the counter, those 2 pink lines staring back at me. Proof of something irreversible, something that would change not just my world, but Ethan's too. I didn't know what he would say, or if we were ready for this. But in that quiet bathroom, with the sun slanting through the frosted window and the faint sound of wind outside, I felt a fragile, unfamiliar certainty bloom in my chest. Whatever happens next, I'm not alone anymore. I must have stared at those 2 pink lines 100 times before I finally picked up the phone. The screen reflected my pale face, my trembling thumb hovering over Ethan's name. For a moment, I almost put it down. Maybe I could keep this to myself a little longer, stay in the fragile cocoon of knowing before the world changed again. But secrets have weight, and this one pressed too hard on my chest. "Hey." His voice came through the line, warm and casual. "I was just finishing the new shelves in your dad's garage. You okay?" I swallowed. "Can you come over? I need to talk to you. In person." He didn't hesitate. "On my way." The minutes between the call and the sound of his truck in the driveway were some of the longest of my life. I paced the living room, my hands restless, brushing over the edge of the couch, the stack of unopened mail, the cold glass of the window pane. When he walked in, he smelled faintly of cedar and cold air. His hair was tousled, and there was a streak of dust on his cheek from whatever project he'd been buried in. "Lily?" His brow furrowed as he shrugged off his coat. "You're scaring me." I didn't sit down. I couldn't. I held the test in my hand like a fragile confession and stepped toward him. "I'm pregnant," I said. The words felt heavier than they should have, even though they were only 2. He froze, completely still. His eyes flicked from my face to the test in my hand, and for 3 eternal seconds, he didn't say a word. Then he crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt in front of me. His hands, warm and steady, came to rest on my stomach over my sweater. His head dipped slightly, as if he needed a moment to breathe with this new reality. He exhaled, voice rough. "I never thought I'd get a second chance with you. And now..." His thumb traced a soft circle against my sweater. "Now I have a chance to be here from the very beginning. I'm not going anywhere, Lily. Not ever again." The sincerity in his voice cracked something in me. All the years of anger, the nights of wondering why he had left, the silent walls I'd built, they trembled under the weight of this moment. "You're not scared?" I whispered. "Terrified," he admitted. And then he smiled, small and real. "But the only thing scarier than this would be walking away from you again. And I swear to you, that's never happening." I felt my knees weaken, and he rose to his feet, pulling me into his arms. His embrace was solid, grounding me as my emotions swirled. Relief, fear, love, and a strange, cautious joy. We stood there in the quiet of my father's living room, the winter light slanting across the floorboards, holding each other as if the house itself had been waiting for this. For the first time since I'd signed that impossible contract, the weight in my chest began to lift. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was a beginning. We stayed like that for a long time, his arms tight around me, the winter light washing the living room in soft gold. My heart was racing, but my breathing had settled into his shoulder, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. Eventually, he pulled back, his hand still firm on my waist, as if afraid I might vanish. His green eyes searched mine with a mixture of wonder and resolve. "We can do this," he said quietly, like he was speaking to both of us. "Not just survive it. Build something real. A family. A life neither of us has to run from anymore." The simplicity of his words rooted deep in me. I had spent so many years bracing myself against disappointment, telling myself that love could vanish like summer smoke. Hearing him speak like that, steady, unpolished, certain, was almost harder to believe than the 2 pink lines had been. I nodded, feeling tears slip free. "I want that too, but I need you to understand. This can't be another promise you make and then break." He flinched slightly at the honesty in my voice, then nodded. "I know. I've lived with the weight of that mistake for 9 years. I can't change the past, Lily, but I can choose every day from now on to be here. For you. For..." He hesitated, then let his hand rest gently on my stomach. "For both of you." We stood there a moment longer, and then he took a breath, like he'd made up his mind about something bigger than both of us. He reached into his coat pocket, fumbled for a second, and pulled out a small velvet box. I stared at it, stunned. "Ethan." "It's not the candlelight dinner or the perfect speech I imagined," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small sapphire in the center. "But I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment. And I think life just gave us one." He sank down to one knee in the middle of my father's living room. No music, no grand gesture, just the quiet hum of the house and the soft hiss of wind against the windows. "Lily Parker," he said, his voice low but clear. "I don't want to build a life in pieces anymore. I want all of it, with you." Will you marry me? My throat tightened. This wasn't the cinematic, sweeping moment of my teenage dreams. It was quieter, more grounded, and in its simplicity, it felt truer than anything we had ever shared before. I knelt down to him, so we were eye to eye, and let my hand cover his. Yes, I said, my voice shaking but sure. It's always been yes. I just didn't know if we'd ever get here. He slipped the ring onto my finger, and it was a perfect fit, as if it had been waiting for me all along. Then he wrapped me in an embrace that felt like coming home after a very long journey. We didn't shout. We didn't cry loudly. We just held each other in that quiet house, two people who had finally stopped running, finally choosing the same life at the same time. Later that evening, we sat at the kitchen table sipping tea, talking about the future in calm, steady tones, baby names, paint colors for the nursery, small repairs the house would need before spring. There were no grand declarations now, just the warmth of shared plans, the kind of peace that comes when hope no longer feels fragile. I watched him lean back in his chair, one hand absently resting over mine, and thought about the strange road that had led us here. A contract I never wanted to sign. 7 nights in a cold lodge, laughter in wet socks, music on forgotten keys, and a storm that stripped us down to the truth. When I went to bed that night, the ring warm against my skin, I whispered to the quiet room, "This is how our real story begins." Winter melted slowly into early spring, and with it, my life unfolded into a rhythm I never imagined I would know. Weekdays were for the bookstore, for stacking new arrivals and answering neighbors' questions about the baby. Weekends were for the lodge, where the world felt a little quieter, a little more ours. By the time my belly had rounded, beneath soft sweaters, climbing the lodge's front steps took more effort, but the reward was always the same, a place where time seemed to pause. That Saturday afternoon, the sky was clear, the last of the snow still clinging to the shadows of the pines. I stood by the wide window of the lodge's great room, watching the lake thaw into silver blue patches. My hand rested on my stomach, feeling the gentle weight of new life. Behind me, I heard the familiar sound of keys. Slow at first, tentative, then steady. I turned and saw Ethan at the piano, his posture relaxed, his hands confident on the ivory. It was our song, the one we'd fumbled through as teenagers, the one that had haunted me for years. But now it was different, fuller, complete. He'd found the missing notes, or maybe we'd both just grown into them. I sank onto the couch, listening. The melody floated through the room like sunlight through the tall windows, soft and golden. As the final note lingered, our daughter, or son, we'd chosen not to know, kicked gently against my palm. A laugh escaped me, quiet and odd. "She likes it," I said. Ethan swiveled on the bench, his smile boyish and warm. "She? Or he? Either way, I'll take that as approval." He crossed the room and knelt in front of me, pressing his ear against the curve of my stomach. "Did you hear that? First fan review." I brushed a hand through his hair, my heart swelling with a feeling that was equal parts peace and disbelief. There had been a time when I thought I'd never have this, when love felt like a door that had slammed shut and locked for good. He looked up at me, his eyes reflecting the late afternoon light. "I want her, or him, to grow up hearing this song, to know it's theirs as much as it's ours." I nodded, throat tight. "It already is." We spent the evening in a rhythm that had become ours. He cooked while I sat on the stool by the counter, my feet propped up. We ate slowly, the fire crackling in the hearth. After dinner, we walked out onto the porch. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of wet earth and melting snow. The lodge was no longer just a reminder of what we'd lost. It had become the symbol of what we were building, a second story to a life we'd both thought had ended years ago. As the sky faded into soft pinks and purples, I felt the baby kick again, and Ethan reached for my hand. He placed it over his heart, steady and strong. "This," he said quietly. This is everything I never knew I needed. I leaned against him, the lake reflecting the last light of the day, and listened to the steady beat of his heart. For once, there was no storm outside or inside, just the soft hum of life moving forward. In that moment, I realized happiness wasn't always loud or triumphant. Sometimes it was a simple song finally finished, a baby's kick in time with the melody, and the warmth of knowing that after all the broken chapters, our story had found its way home. The snow began to melt in slow, careful whispers. I watched it from the porch of the lodge one quiet Sunday morning, the sun slipping through the pines and scattering diamonds across the wet earth. In the distance, the lake mirrored the sky, patches of ice breaking apart like old fears finally letting go. Behind me, through the open door, I heard the piano. Our piano. Ethan was playing the melody again, the one that had been waiting 9 years to be finished. This time, the notes weren't heavy with regret. They were light, alive, stitched with something I had almost forgotten how to feel: joy. I rested my hands on my belly, feeling the soft, steady thump of life within me. A heartbeat inside a heartbeat. Each gentle kick was a reminder that what started as a sentence, 7 nights in a shared room, a contract signed in desperation, had become the greatest gift I never expected. I thought back to the girl I had been when I first drove up this mountain in the middle of winter. Angry, afraid, convinced that the man waiting in that lodge was a stranger who would always hold my past against me. 7 nights. That was the deal. 7 nights of obligation, of proximity I hadn't wanted, of walls I swore I would never let down. But life has a way of reshaping things we resist. Somewhere between the burst pipes, the candlelit storms, and the hesitant notes of an unfinished song, the edges of my anger softened. I saw the boy I'd loved behind the man I'd hated. I saw the way time can wound, but also how it can teach. I closed my eyes and listened to the piano drift through the crisp air. Ethan shifted into the bridge we'd added together in this new life, his hands finding the keys like they were always meant to. Inside me, a flutter answered the music. I smiled. "You hear that?" I whispered to the little one. "That's your song too." The lodge smelled of wood smoke and pine. The old walls, once silent witnesses to distance and grief, now carried the echo of laughter, the quiet rhythm of love rebuilt. I realized that this house wasn't haunted by the past anymore. It was alive with the sound of second chances. I stepped back inside, letting the warmth of the fire wrap around me. Ethan looked up from the piano, his smile soft and unguarded, and for a moment, we didn't need words. He played the last note, letting it hang in the room like a benediction. The baby kicked again, firm enough to make me laugh. Ethan's eyes lit with that same awe I'd seen the first time he felt it beneath his hand. He crossed the room, pressing a gentle kiss to my temple before crouching to listen. "That's our heartbeat," he murmured. "All 3 of us." I thought about the contract I'd once signed with shaking hands, the one that had felt like a punishment, a trap. And yet, in a way I still couldn't fully explain, that piece of paper had delivered me to this moment, standing in the sunlight of a melting winter, listening to the man I loved finish our song while a new life moved within me. 7 nights had felt like a sentence, but they had become the first chapter of the life I didn't know I was waiting for. Outside, the last patches of snow slid from the roof with a soft hiss, dripping into the earth that was ready to bloom again. Inside, the piano faded into silence, replaced by the sound of a fire, a soft laugh, and the steady, undeniable rhythm of 3 hearts beating in time. And just like that, our story of 7 nights closed, not with an ending, but with the quiet, certain beginning of everything that truly mattered.